My name is Victoria Siewnarine-Geelalsingh. I am a clinical psychologist at ParentingTT. Today we're going to talk about suicide awareness and prevention. So a lot of you may have heard the term suicide before, and when we talk about suicide, we're going to be talking about suicide ideation, which means suicide thoughts, and suicide completion, which means when you follow through with your thoughts and you are actually able to complete the act. We will also talk about suicide attempt, which would be when you try to complete the act, but it's a failed attempt. The first thing we want to just touch on really briefly would be the prevalence of suicide. And when we look at our Caribbean neighbors, we would see that we actually have a higher prevalence than those other Caribbean islands. And when I say prevalence, I mean the frequency in which it occurs in our tiny Trinidad and Tobago. We also see that males are more often likely than females to complete suicide, and that is because they tend to use more lethal means. The age group that has a higher prevalence would be between teens and mid-adulthood. And when you really go into the psyche of that age bracket, what you find is that they're establishing a sense of self. And a lot of times their need for a support system is greater, but because of demands in school and young adulthood, getting a job, all those kinds of things, relational issues, you find that they may not be getting that support that they need. So again, we'll talk about that as we go on. So the first thing we want to talk about when it comes to suicide awareness and prevention is loved ones should try to develop effective communication skills. And this is key for supporting someone that you feel as though may be experiencing suicide ideation or even has had past attempts. Anyone suffering with significant distress can feel suicidal. So I'm saying that to say that suicidal thoughts do not only occur for those with mental illness. And that's really important for us to remember. I'm going to say it again. Suicidal thoughts do not only occur for those with mental illness. I could be a normally functioning individual and the stresses of life weigh down on me. My support system may be lacking and I may feel suicidal ideation. Suicide is preventable and you can help. You don't need to be a professional to help. You don't need to have years of training. You just really need to care. So briefly, what does it feel like to be suicidal? Someone who's suicidal may tell you that when they're not too bad, everything is painful inside. And when they're worse, they feel like a rotten person and they have these intrusive, ruminating thoughts such as I wish I was dead or I don't deserve to live. Now this is when they're not too bad or when they're a little bit worse. They feel like this. A consistent pain that they cannot get rid of and they want it to stop. These people are aware that they're having this experience. They're aware that they're in pain. They're aware that they are not coping, but they just have the inability to change their situation. And no matter how they try, how hard they try, they cannot turn off these thoughts. And more than likely, they hate feeling this way. But because the thoughts are so scary, they succumb. They want to make it stop. And a lot of times, they would try other things. They may try self-medicating. In our country, what do? We go take a drink or we go hang out with our friends and have a laugh at it. But some of those things may be adaptive in terms of finding support from your friends, but some of them are maladaptive and they can make the situation worse. So when it gets to a point where they're so scared that they're going to be depressed for the rest of their life, they act on impulse and they attempt. And many times when they attempt, they complete. Suicidal thoughts grow from fear, helplessness, hopelessness, isolation, pain, and most importantly, no support. If you can think about a math equation, we can say suicide equals hopelessness. Suicide equals hopelessness. So then you can say that if you want to prevent suicide, you might want to instill hope. So that's when now we're going to start talking about empathy. Empathy is non-judgmental. Empathy does not mean giving a solution. I know many of us, it comes naturally when our peers or our family members or our loved ones are talking to us. We just want to tell them what to do to make the situation right. And that's fine. But in many cases, it's not what that person needs. That person needs us to not give them a solution. There's a graphic, some of you may be familiar with it. It's of a fox who's in a cave, and that fox is crying, and there's a gray cloud over her head. And along comes a bear, sees the fox in the cave. What would many of us do? We would see our friend down in a cave and we're up, and we would stretch our hand down and try to pull that fox out of the cave. But that's not empathy. What the bear does is the bear climbs down into the cave with the fox. And then, what would some of us do if we find ourselves in the cave with our friend who has a grey cloud? We would try to bring sunshine. But that's not what the bear does. What the bear does is the bear shares the grey cloud with the fox. So the bear sits there. Whatever negative emotions the fox is feeling at that point in time, the bear shares that negative emotion. The bear has his hand stretched out, touching the fox. So there's some sort of physical contact, and that physical contact mimics an emotional contact that the fox needs. And then in the last graphic, you see that the fox's grey cloud disappears, and then there's a heart. And that's the end of empathy. Nowhere in the graphic has the bear taken the fox out of the hole. But the fox is no longer sad, no longer lonely, no longer helpless, no longer isolated, no longer afraid, and no longer in pain. Because the bear has successfully managed to support the fox in whatever situation the fox was in, not offering a solution, but just there, supporting. And that is the key thing that we need to remember. It's a skill to practice. Empathy says, there's a problem, don't give a solution, just sit there. Share the pain, share the fear. So having said that, let's talk about a couple things that we should avoid. When we're with someone who has suicidal ideation, we should avoid glorifying or sensationalizing suicide. What does that mean? In our culture now, and with the way information travels over social media, over the news, television, all these sorts of things, we are exposed to a lot of instances of suicide completion and attempts. And what it actually does is it desensitizes us to how real and how painful this dynamic actually is. So we should avoid sensationalizing it. It's not the way to go. Not because someone else did it means you should do it too. Secondly, we should avoid normalizing suicide. Research has shown that if someone is in close connection to someone else who was able to complete or who had attempted suicide in the past, then the likelihood of their attempting would increase. So what that means is, if my father completed suicide, when I am going through my trouble and I'm thinking of ways to cope, that would be one of the options that I think about, just because I would have had exposure to it. So normalizing suicide happens like this. I would think that's a norm, that's a way to cope. So that's something we should avoid. The third thing we shouldn't do is to attribute suicide to a single cause. Because one thing does not cause a person to have suicidal ideation. If I fail an exam, that's not going to be the reason why I want to take my life. If my boyfriend breaks up with me, that's not going to be the reason why. It's usually a mass of situations or circumstances that I had an inability in coping with that has caused me to feel this level of helplessness and hopelessness, like I can't get out of it. Significant trauma or persistent failure or, letdowns, low self-esteem, all these things add together. So suicide isn't about one thing. So if you're listening and you've had ideation in the past and you're thinking, oh, well, I just had ideation that one time because I was going through a hard situation with that one thing, I would recommend to you that you seek professional help, you talk to someone, because if you're unable to pinpoint what were the reasons, or if you think the reason was one thing, chances are there are more things that you don't have the insight to see right now what it is, but maybe talking it through and with help, you would be able to identify them. And if you can identify the things that are causing you significant stress, then you're more likely to adapt coping mechanisms to help you through it. Lastly, we should avoid focusing on details. And the reason for that is because people remember what they hear and what they see. So if I'm in a heightened emotional state and I want to attempt suicide, instead of thinking about a plan for myself, I'm just going to remember what my friend told me last night. And that's what I'm going to do. So we have to be really careful when we're talking about this. Talking about sensationalizing suicide and normalizing suicide. With the age of social media, we get everything on our phones. Everything comes through on WhatsApp, or everything comes through on Messenger, Instagram, Snapchat, all those things. What do we do when we receive that kind of information? Well, firstly, do not share it. Secondly, delete it. Seeing pictures of people who have completed suicide, or even pictures of people who might be in the hospital because of failed attempts, is actually secondary trauma. And what secondary trauma is, the trauma doesn't actually happen to you, but you experience similar trauma type symptoms because you are exposed to what the trauma looks like. So it's similar to gunshot victims. They are the ones who experience the trauma, but the witnesses would have experienced secondary trauma. And when you get these pictures, you become a witness because you see it. So delete it. Don't let it be there that you keep seeing it over and over again and re-traumatizing yourself. And absolutely do not share it, because then that means that you're going to traumatize somebody else. So we need to be responsible with these things. We need to say no to suicide, ask about suicide. Suicide is 100% preventable. Speak up, reach out. And I'm going back to the equation. Suicide equals hopelessness. If we want to get rid of suicide, we need to change that equation. So I'm going to give you a new equation, and it's active listening plus empathy plus compassion equals hope. Active listening plus empathy plus compassion equals hope. So I'm going to say something that's going to make you remember this. How many of you have seen the Superman movie where there was an S on his clothes and the girl came up to him and she said, "It's an S." And he said, "Well, on my planet, it means hope." So then we're going to say hashtag mental health superhero. We're all going to be a mental health superhero. We're all going to be like Superman, because we're all going to be able to give people hope. And how are we going to give people hope? By actively listening, by being empathic, and by being compassionate. So we spoke about empathy before. We're going to speak briefly now about active listening and compassion. When you're actively listening to somebody, you're giving them vocal cues. You're giving them cues with your body language to reinforce the fact that you are there, you are present in that conversation, and nothing else is more important to you in that moment than the things that they are saying to you about them. Active listening is also not making it about you. So if they say, "I had a hard time in work yesterday," you don't say, "Yeah, me too, I didn't eat breakfast and I was so tired." No, you leave it about them. You let them talk, you listen to them, you actively listen to them, you're compassionate. So what does it mean to have compassion? Compassion means to care. Compassion means that we're showing that person that they are important, they are valuable, we care about what's happening to them. Not that we're listening to what's happening to them so that we can go tell our friends, or so that we can take a selfie with them crying in the background and put it up on Facebook and say, "I care." That's not what compassion is about. Compassion is about allowing ourselves to be trusted by that person, for that person to allow themselves to pour into us and to empty into us, and we are not going to judge them. We are going to continue to care about them and have their best interest at heart. All those things, active listening plus empathy plus compassion equals hope. Hope makes you a mental health superhero. All of these skills that I just talked about, we can put it together in an acronym. And the acronym is SHUSH. 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 How do I shush? I show that I care, I have patience, and I practice being non-judgmental. I use open questions like tell me more. And what open questions are going to do is it's not going to shut down the answer. I just sit there and I actively listen. So then you give people an opportunity, you show them that you care, you show them that you're interested in what's going on with them. They don't feel isolated when you show them that you're interested, and they're able to share with you a lot more than they would if you ask a closed question. Number 4, say it back to them and check in that you've understood what they said. Remember, don't interrupt or offer a solution. Why am I saying it back? Well, a lot of times when people say things, we don't hear what they mean. So we need to say it back to make sure that what we understood from the words that they said is actually what they meant for us to hear. Also, that's a double purpose. Not only do we verify that we understood, we also validate to them that we spend time listening to them. And it makes them feel a sense of belonging. It makes them feel a sense of worth, that somebody would sit there and listen to them and then take the time to say it back. And when they do say it back, the person realizes, hey, they were really listening to me. I have a little bit of worth. And that does wonders. 5th, have courage. Why do we need to have courage? Because it's a difficult conversation to have. If you feel as though someone you know is suicidal or at risk of inflicting self-harm or harm on others, don't leave that person alone. Always encourage help-seeking behavior. It's hard to do. It's scary. This is a scary topic in the first place. Second of all, you don't know how they're going to react to you coming and saying, hey, I've seen some changes in you. I want to help. What's going on? That person themselves wouldn't want to open up. But continue at it. Continue encouraging them. Continue reinforcing their worth. Don't be afraid to tell your loved ones about your observations and about why you're worried. So our acronym is SHUSH. S, show you care. H, have patience and be non-judgmental. U, use open questions like tell me more. S, say it back and check in that you've understood. H, have courage. Suicide is preventable. Many people who feel suicidal are experiencing a treatable mental health condition. I'm saying that again. Suicide is preventable. Many people who feel suicidal are experiencing a treatable mental health condition. You can help. Yes, you can help, but if you need to refer someone for professional help, I'm going to share some resources for support and intervention. Firstly, you can contact Lifeline, which is a 24-hour hotline. They can be reached at 645-2800. Alive is a suicide hotline, and they can be reached by 688-8525 or 650-5270. You can also find a psychologist on Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists webpage, www.psychologytt.org. You can call any accident and emergency center. Any accident and emergency center that exists in the country, you can call. You can also visit any mental health clinic. If you feel as though someone has suicidal ideation and you want to take them to talk to somebody, you can just walk into any mental health clinic, let them know what's happening, and they will see you. In the event of attempt, you can call an ambulance at 811. You can also contact your spiritual leaders, yogis, gurus, or mentors. You can also seek assistance from trusted teachers, coaches, supervisors, or close friends and family. If you or someone you love is facing difficulty coping with negative emotions and are considering suicide, don't leave that person alone. Always encourage help-seeking behavior. Continue encouraging them. Continue reinforcing their worth. Don't be afraid to tell your loved ones about your observations and about why you're worried. Please ensure that professional help is accessed.
For more information or to schedule an appointment with a counselor, call ParentingTT at 662-8264 or 289-1788. We can also be reached via email, parentingtt@gmail.com. Visit our website, parentingtt.org, and follow us on social media at our Facebook page and on Instagram.